What does it mean to be a man? Does it mean being big and strong? Does it mean being silent and stoic? Does it mean being tragic and conflicted? Different games will give you different answers, and the sheer number of representations to choose from is inundating, to say the least. Men dominate the games industry, not just in terms of the characters we play, but the real world too. In the US, around 76% of video game developers are male, despite nearly 1 in 2 gamers being female. Not to mention that the vast majority of game protagonists are men. This highlights that video games underrepresent women and overrepresent men, both in and out of the digital space. So, with this sea of masculinity in video games, the question now stands: are these representations even good? Are they teaching players the right lessons? Are they acceptable reflections of what masculinity should be? It's a tough question because every game handles it uniquely. There are certainly many games featuring valuable, intricately layered depictions of men. Take Arthur Morgan from Red Dead Redemption 2, or Harry Dubois from Disco Elysium, Nathan Drake from Uncharted, or Kratos from the new God of War series. Stephen Conway writes an excellent article centering around Kratos and toxic masculinity in gaming that is absolutely worth reading. Unfortunately, the truth is that for every Kratos, for every rich, constructive, and deeply human male lead, there are 100 one-dimensional meatheads who hold little to no moral worth. Chris Redfield, Kyle Crane, Duke Nukem, Aiden Pierce, Leisure Suit Larry, Lo Wang, Alex Mercer, Trevor Phillips, Doom Guy, Master Chief, Postal Dude, Kratos' younger self from the older games, and virtually every Call of Duty protagonist you can think of. Some of these characters are so bad that they actively perpetuate the archaic values of hypermasculinity that have plagued gaming's past. Looking at you, Duke. That doesn't mean these characters can't change, or be a source of entertainment. Kratos is a perfect example of a character who was once rather shallow, a barbaric ghost of a man driven purely by anger. And there's nothing wrong with reveling in his ultraviolent bloodshed. That is, ultimately, God of War's key selling point. However, Kratos grew into a multifaceted human soul, distinct from his revenge-driven past. In fact, that's exactly what Conway touches on in his article. This father-son relationship allows the developers to ruminate upon the toxic masculinity that has defined much of the series' past. Kratos' trajectory moves from the flatness of one defining characteristic, rage, to an introspective consideration of this emotion and its consequences. So it's not about erasing toxic masculinity from game characters and acting like it doesn't exist. It does. It's more about recognizing the harm it can cause, acknowledging its consequences, and thus encouraging the positive aspects of manhood. Through that lens, let's learn more through another protagonist who I think, much like Kratos, successfully communicates what it is that makes a good man without censoring what makes a bad one. Joel Miller is first and foremost a father. When he loses his daughter in the game's opening, he loses much of himself. Comparing his character before and after the cordyceps outbreak is like comparing two different men. Initially, Joel seems a stoic and distant man, yet charmingly playful and gentle with his daughter. Faced with Sarah's death, it becomes obvious that she was the most important thing in Joel's life. Cut to 20 years later, and we see how this loss has affected Joel over time. Without fatherhood as a drive, all that remains is a primal will to survive at any cost. Joel's just going through the motions of life, providing an empty shell for the player to inhabit. He's mostly devoid of all personality, besides some slivers brought out by Tess, with whom he possesses a strong, presumably sexual bond. This last resort attitude, and this devastated world he's been left with, bring out the absolute worst in Joel, and for most of the game, this is the state we play him in. This provides an unequivocal goal for the player. Kill anything that gets in your way. Never once do we question why Joel kills an enemy, because his goal is the simplest one a character can have. Get from point A to point B, no matter what. Things change when we meet Ellie. Initially, Joel treats her more like an object than a person, just cargo to be delivered. But with Tess's death, and Joel gradually forming a father-like attachment to Ellie, his motivation flips. Upon realizing that curing the cordyceps would mean Ellie's death, Joel rejects his prior task of saving humanity and dispatches a hyper-masculine rampage. In the game's finale, Joel becomes a one-man army, slaughtering dozens of innocent people who were once his allies. This segment is not a cutscene. The player is in direct command of Joel, a deliberate choice by the developers. We feel the weight of what Joel has done firsthand, leaving this conclusion famously controversial among players. Some view this as total ludonarrative dissonance, meaning a lack of harmony between gameplay and narrative, or just a shameless masculine power fantasy that destroys any connection they'd made with Joel. And I understand that point of view, I really do. I may not agree, because I think that the game highlights the horror of what Joel has done and heavily discourages it, but I do understand. However, it's the sequel set 5 years later that I think proves The Last of Us to be a story that understands masculinity and provides a valuable lesson about its potential dangers. In Part 2, we are Ellie and Joel is dead. This immediately provides a motivation just as strong and straightforward as Joel's was in the first game. Kill the people who killed Joel. Now, despite the protagonist being a young woman this time, Ellie's character is actually steeped in stereotypes of masculinity. Her goal? Revenge. Her instrument to achieve it? Violence. Her main emotion? Anger. These are all traditionally male archetypes and can be found in tons of mainstream media, particularly that of the revenge genre. This goes directly against the old-fashioned idea that men and women are separate. In reality, there's crossover. Men can be in distress, women can want revenge. And just like Ellie, women can be dangerous. Anyone can possess toxic masculine traits, regardless of gender. So while we do get to see Joel's character from the outside perspective of Ellie's memories, in a weird way we still are Joel. At least we are the Joel that remains within Ellie. We are his wrath, his violence, his grief, his vengeance. We as players act out all his bad traits through Ellie, because we feel his absence just as she does. For Joel, it was his daughter he lost. For Ellie, it's her dad. But our motivation's even stronger now because, unlike with Sarah, we actually got the time to know Joel. In the first game, we played as him. We were interpolated into him. Now that he's gone, it's like we've lost a part of ourselves. And that is exactly how Ellie feels. This is why, just like the first game, Part 2's ending is so controversial. As the story reaches its crescendo, Ellie holds the life of Joel's killer, Abby, right in her hands. And after everything, after all the bloodshed, all the tears, all the pain, and all the death, she doesn't go through with it. Her memory of Joel comes to Ellie's mind, and she spares Abby. We are left so bewildered. Why, at the last possible moment, did Ellie decide to let it go? Only later, when we're finally shown what that memory represents, do we understand. It's Ellie's last conversation with Joel. Deeply hurt after finding out that Joel lied to her about the fireflies at the end of the first game, Ellie's ignored him for 2 years. But now, she's come to confront him about his actions.
You're such an asshole.
I'm not trying to.
I was supposed to die in that hospital. My life would have fucking mattered. But you took that from me.
Joel stands strong.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.
I don't think I can ever forgive you for that. But I would like to try.
I'd like that.
They leave on good terms, both hoping to mend their relationship. They never get the chance because Joel dies soon after. This final conversation represents forgiveness. Ellie's opening up to Joel again. She knows that what he did was wrong, and she'll never stop thinking that, but she wants him back in her life. This type of maturity, accepting people's faults, letting go of grudges, and moving on from the pain. It's something we typically learn from our fathers. Resilience, respect, being the bigger man. These are masculine traits that are not toxic, but rather benevolent and admirable. So yes, it was Joel who taught Ellie to be violent and relentless, and it was his death that drove her to revenge. But it was also Joel who taught her how to forgive, who taught her how to be strong and how to love. When the game concludes, Ellie's still hurt and lost, but she's finally managed to forgive Joel and move on from his death. This is in direct contrast to Joel's brother Tommy, who, when we last saw him, was still holding on to revenge. The hatred burning inside of him had left him bitter and unhappy, a husk of who he once was. With nothing left to hold on to, Ellie ventures off, leaving Joel's guitar behind, symbolic of her moving on with her life. Joel Miller is not a perfect man, nor is Kratos, nor is anyone, but I wouldn't want men to be depicted as invulnerable super soldiers who never falter. I'm so glad that games are moving away from those characters and embracing layered souls like Joel. After all, only through mistakes and lessons can we learn to be better.